And therefore, I adjure you to tell me the nature of piety and impiety, which you said that you knew so well, and of murder, and of other offenses against the gods. What are they? Is not piety in every action always the same? And impiety again, is it not always the opposite of piety, and always the same with itself, having, as impiety, one notion which includes whatever is impious?
To be sure, Socrates.
And what is piety, and what is impiety?
Piety is doing as I am doing, that is to say, prosecuting anyone who is guilty of murder, sacrilege, or of any similar crime, whether he be your father, or mother, or whoever he may be. That makes no difference, and not to prosecute them is impiety. And please to consider, Socrates, what a notable proof I will give you of the truth of my words, a proof which I have already given to others, of the principle, I mean, that the impious, whoever he may be, ought not to go unpunished. For do not men regard Zeus as the best and most righteous of the gods? And yet they admit that he bound his father Cronos, because he wickedly devoured his sons, and that he too had punished his own father Uranus for a similar reason, in a nameless manner. And yet when I proceed against my father, they are angry with me. So inconsistent are they in their way of thinking when the gods are concerned, and when I am concerned.
May not this be reason, Euthyphro, why I am charged with impiety? That I cannot away with these stories about the gods, and therefore I suppose that people think me wrong. But, as you who are well informed about them approve of them, I cannot do better than assent to your superior wisdom. What else can I say, confessing as I do, that I know nothing about them? Tell me, for the love of Zeus, whether you really believe that they are true.
Oh yes, Socrates, and things more wonderful still, of which the world is in ignorance.
And do you really believe that the gods fought with one another, and had dire quarrels, battles, and the like, as the poets say, and as you may see represented in the works of great artists? The temples are full of them, and notably the robe of Athena, which is carried up to the Acropolis at the great Panathenea, is embroidered with them. Are all these tales of the gods true, Euthyphro?
Yes, Socrates, and as I was saying, I can tell you, if you would like to hear them, many other things about the gods which would quite amaze you.
I dare say, and you shall tell me them at some other time when I have leisure. But just at present, I would rather hear from you a more precise answer which you have not as yet given, my friend, to the question, what is piety? When asked, you only replied, doing as you do, charging your father with murder.
And what I said was true, Socrates.
No doubt, Euthyphro, but you would admit that there are many other pious acts.
There are.
Remember that I did not ask you to give me 2 or 3 examples of piety, but to explain the general idea which makes all pious things to be pious. Do not you recollect that there was one idea which made the impious impious and the pious pious?
I remember.
Tell me what is the nature of this idea, and then I shall have a standard to which I may look, and by which I may measure actions, whether yours or those of anyone else, and then I shall be able to say that such and such an action is pious, such another impious.
I will tell you if you like.
I should very much like.
Piety, then, is that which is dear to the gods, and impiety is that which is not dear to them.
Very good, Euthyphro. You have now given me the sort of answer which I wanted, but whether what you say is true or not I cannot as yet tell, although I make no doubt that you will prove the truth of your words.
Of course.
Come, then, and let us examine what we are saying. That thing or person which is dear to the gods is pious, and that thing or person which is hateful to the gods is impious, these two being the extreme opposites of one another. Was not that said?
It was.
And well said?
Yes, Socrates, I thought so. It was certainly said.
And further, Euthyphro, the gods were admitted to have enmities and hatreds and differences.
Yes, that was also said.
And what sort of difference creates enmity and anger? Suppose, for example, that you and I, my good friend, differ about a number. Do differences of this sort make us enemies and set us at variance with one another? Do we not go at once to arithmetic and put an end to them by a sum?
True.
Or suppose that we differ about magnitudes. Do we not quickly end the difference by measuring?
Very true.
And we end a controversy about heavy and light by resorting to a weighing machine.
To be sure.
But what differences are there which cannot be thus decided, and which therefore make us angry and set us at enmity with one another? I dare say the answer does not occur to you at the moment, and therefore I will suggest that these enmities arise when the matters of difference are the just and unjust, good and evil, honorable and dishonorable. Are not these the points about which men differ, and about which, when we are unable satisfactorily to decide our differences, you and I, and all of us, quarrel, when we do quarrel?
Yes, Socrates, the nature of the differences about which we quarrel is such as you describe.
And the quarrels of the gods, noble Euthyphro, when they occur, are of a like nature.
Certainly they are.
They have differences of opinion, as you say, about good and evil, just and unjust, honorable and dishonorable. There would have been no quarrels among them if there had been no such differences, would there now?
You are quite right.
Does not every man love that which he deems noble and just and good, and hate the opposite of them?
Very true.
But, as you say, people regard the same things, some as just and others as unjust. But these they dispute, and so there arise wars and fightings among them.
Yes, very true.
Then the same things are hated by the gods and loved by the gods, and are both hateful and dear to them?
True.
And upon this view the same things, Euthyphro, will be pious and also impious.
So I should suppose.
Then, my friend, I remark with surprise that you have not answered the question which I asked, for I certainly did not ask you to tell me what action is both pious and impious, but now it would seem that what is loved by the gods is also hated by them, and therefore, Euthyphro, in thus chastising your father, you may very likely be doing what is agreeable to Zeus, but disagreeable to Cronus, or Uranus, and what is acceptable to Hephaestus, but unacceptable to Hera. And there may be other gods who have similar differences of opinion.
But I believe, Socrates, that all the gods would be agreed as to the propriety of punishing a murderer. There would be no difference of opinion about that.
Well, but speaking of men, Euthyphro, did you ever hear anyone arguing that a murderer or any sort of evildoer ought to be let off?
I should rather say that these are the questions which they are always arguing, especially in courts of law. They commit all sorts of crimes, and there is nothing which they will not do or say in their own defense.
But do they admit their guilt, Euthyphro, and yet say that they ought not to be punished?
No, they do not.
Then there are some things which they do not venture to say and do, for they do not venture to argue that the guilty ought to be unpunished, but they deny their guilt, do they not?
Yes.
Then they do not argue that the evildoer should not be punished, but they argue about the fact of who the evildoer is, and what he did, and when?
True.
And the gods are in the same case, if, as you assert, they quarrel about just and unjust, and some of them say, while others deny, that injustice is done among them. For surely neither God nor man will ever venture to say that the doer of injustice is not to be punished.
That is true, Socrates, in the main.
But they join issue about the particulars, gods and men alike, And if they dispute at all, they dispute about some act which is called in question, and by which some is affirmed to be just, and others to be unjust. Is not that true?
This is quite true.
Well then, my dear friend Euthyphro, do tell me, for my better instruction and information, what proof have you that in the opinion of all the gods, a servant who is guilty of murder, and is put in chains by the master of the dead man, and dies because he is put in chains before he who bound him can learn from the interpreters of the gods what he ought to do with him, dies unjustly, and that on behalf of such an one, a son ought to proceed against his father and accuse him of murder,